Hello and welcome to installment 7 of the Piano Lessons 1, 2, 3 lecture series. I'm Ryan Neubauer. Let's begin. Today we're going to talk about reading key signatures in both flat and sharp keys, as well as chord inversions and an introduction to figured bass. Well, let's get started. In lesson 6, we had covered what key signatures are and how they function, and now we are going to learn how to read them. If you remember, we did cover how to read sharp key signatures, but we did not cover how to read flat key signatures. So let's start with the sharp, because we might already know that. Think back, and if you remember, we look at the last sharp, right? Not the first, none of the middle ones, the last one. And the last one represents the leading tone of the major scale, so degree 7. And we know that degree 7 in a major scale is 1/2 step below tonic, or the root. So all we have to do is look at this note, and this is a D sharp. And 1/2 step above D sharp, if you're looking at a keyboard or have a keyboard visualized, is E. So this is either E major, or it's relative minor, and we will get into relative and parallel minor in a bit. So sharps are pretty easy. That's the same rule all the time. Flats have a caveat to them, but there is a general rule. If there are multiple flats, you look at the second to last flat, and that is your key. So we have B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat. We do have multiple flats, check. But we don't have multiple flats here, and that's where the caveat will come in. But we have multiple flats here. The second to last one is A flat. So this key signature is A flat major, or it's relative minor. And we write that as A flat major. So the caveat to flat key signatures is that the first flat key signature only contains one flat. There aren't multiple ones, so we can't look to the second to the last one. But if we think about the order of flats, B, G, C, F, if you were to continue going in reverse and loop back around, you'd be back at F. That's the way I remember this, but when there's one flat, it's F major, or it's relative minor. And that's about as tricky as it gets. Now we can have up to 7 sharps or 7 flats, and there are enharmonic keys. So C sharp major is the enharmonic key of D flat major. And if you line up the notes, the spelling is different, but the tonal value is the same. It sounds like you're playing the same thing, and you are. All right, let's move on to our next topic, relative minor versus parallel minor. Okay, let me draw up a staff. Is it showing up? Barely. Let me let that dry for a few minutes. So let's talk about it while the board's drying. Relative versus parallel minor. The difference is relative minor is a minor key that is in common with the major key. So the major chord, the major scale and the minor scale share the key signature. They do not share, however, their root tone. So last time we were talking about C major and C minor. They share their root. Those are parallel minors. Relative minors are built on different degrees but use the same key signature, so the same set of sharps and flats. Alright, now let's give this a whirl. There we go, that's a bit better. go bass clef this time. We always use treble clef. Alright. So I'm going to build you a C major scale. Alright, there's C major. Now I'm going to build you C minor. And I'm going to offset these. Flat third. Flat 6. Flat 7. Now I'm going to build you the relative minor to C major. And the relative minor of a major key is always going to be in its natural minor form. And once again, I'll offset these. And I'll just put in these little dividers. So this is C major, this is C minor, and as it turns out, this is A natural minor. So how did I decide what scale degree to build it on? Well, the scale degrees of C major are 1, 2, 3, 1 through 7. And A is the 6th degree of C. 6th note in the C major scale is A. So the natural minor, or the relative minor of a major key, is always built on degree 6 of the major scale. Alternatively, you could think of it as being 3 half steps down from the root or tonic. So if you start on C, half step down is B, half step down from B is B flat, half step down from B flat is A. Either way will get you to A, and if you build a scale on that, it will be A natural minor. And notice that both the C major and its relative minor have no sharps or flats, meaning they are of the same key center. Whereas C minor, while it shares the root note, has the addition of accidentals to alter the movement between notes. Alright, let's get this out of the way. And we're going to move to chords and their inversions. Last time we talked about triads, the different types, major, minor, augmented, and diminished. Now we're going to talk about chord inversions and how to both notate their inversion and derive the root of a chord from a set of notes. So first of all, when we're talking about chords, not everything is spelled out in real music in block form. So last time we had them written in root form. They were just a solid block, and it was easy to identify what the root was. But in real music, that is not the case. Sometimes chords are inverted, sometimes they're spaced out, sometimes notes are split up between different instruments, and sometimes we do a thing called tonicization, where we use the notes of a chord, and it implies that that is the chord we're focusing on, without ever actually playing it in chord form. For example, you might know this famous piece. That little bass riff we have, it's called an Alberti bass, very popular in classical repertoire. That Alberti bass is tonicizing the various chords, C major, F major, or C major, F, and G. But it doesn't actually play them at once, rather it plays each note individually. But it's still implying that chord as part of the key center. So we're going to look at some different ways we can see chords appear and derive from them what the chord actually is, the targeted chord. Once again, let me put up a staff for you. If you don't remember the different formulas for the 4 types of triads, you will need to look back. Remember, major is 3/4, minor is 4/3, diminished is 3/3, and augmented is 4/4. If you don't know what I mean, please look back to lesson 6. Alright, first exercise we're going to start with is I'm going to give you a note, and I'm going to tell you what part of a chord it is, and I'm going to ask that you build the correct chord around the note I give you. So I'll put up that note, pause the video, try it out, and then compare your answers with mine. First, we're going to start with, let's do B flat. All right. So this is the 3rd. And I would like you to build a major chord. So this one needs to be major. All right, pause the video, give it a shot, and then come back. So B flat, that's the 3rd of the chord, which means we have to give the root and we have to give the 5th. So for a major chord, the root is 4 half steps below the 3rd. So the 3rd is B flat, 1 half step down is A, 2 is A flat, 3 is G, and then G flat. Now notice I stuck with the theme of flats. I could also notate this as F sharp, but then it wouldn't be a 3rd, would it? So right now this interval is a major 3rd. If I were to do an F sharp, we would call it some sort of 4th. Do you see that? Because we count 1, 2, 3. If it was F sharp, yes, it would be enharmonically equivalent, but the spelling would be incorrect. We'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's important to spell things correctly as well. Now, we also know that the 5th is 3 half steps above the 3rd. So B flat, half step up is B, half step up from B is C, half step up from C is C sharp. But, again, C sharp, that would be a 2nd, right? 1, 2. But enharmonically, C sharp could be written as D flat. So we'll put a D flat there. It's also kind of nice that we have all flats, no sharps. That's not always the case, but in this instance, we have all flats, and you notice that the spacing is actually 3rds. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, so from this, we have constructed a major chord. And we know that the root is G flat, so this is a G flat major triad. Let me play that for you. Could also be enharmonically an F sharp major triad. All right. So these notes, they look differently. You can tell they're a triad. And if you go to play them at the piano, you know that G flat is F sharp, you know, B flat is A sharp, and you know that D flat is C sharp. Same thing, different spelling. Although spelling counts. Okay. Now, I'm going to move on to the next type of exercise. I am going to give you a spaced out chord, and I want you to reduce it to root position. So what shall we do? So this would be middle C. This would be B, A. So that note would be G. And we'll do another G. And we'll do E. And we'll do C6. All right, go ahead and pause the video, give it a shot. Now your goal is to reduce it to a triad. Alright, so you notice that we have 4 notes here, and you think, well wait, if I'm building a triad, how can I build a triad when there's 4 notes? Well, the thing is, 2 of the notes are equivalent, right? This G and this G, they're both Gs. Yes, they're an octave apart, so one's lower than the other, but it's considered a repeated note, so we can treat it as such. So we have G, we have E, and we have C. But we're only going to use one of the Gs. Now, the trick is to reduce it into thirds, right? So let's try moving them around a bit. We'll do this. In our first round, we'll use orange. So we'll put the G here. Alright? G. Now we also have a C and an E. This C is really high up. Let me bring that down an octave. Okay, and we'll keep the E there. Alright. It's starting to look closer to a triad, but it's still pretty spaced out, right? We do have a third here. 1, 2, 3, but we have what here? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's not quite what we wanted. So let's try and move the notes around again. This spacing is good, so I could put the G up here. But for teaching's sake, I'll bring the E down. We'll do the third try in green. So we'll do E, G, C. Alright, so now how does it look? Still not quite like a triad, but again, closer than the original. We have 1, 2, 3. That's good, that checks out. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a little bit too big. But what if I bring the C down here? So we'll put C, E, G. So now let's take a look at it. We have 1, 2, 3. That checks out. We have 1, 2, 3. That checks out. So we know that that's a triad, so we can put a check next to that. What kind of triad is it? Well, because it's reduced down, we can't make any of the spacings smaller. If you put the C up, C would be here. You just can't get it any more tight-knit than that. So we know that this is the root, right? Third and fifth. So the root is C. So it's some sort of C triad, but is it C major, C minor, C augmented, C diminished? Again, look at the intervals. So we know that it's a third and a third, that checks out. So C up to E, that's 4 half steps, that's a major third. And then E up to G, that's 3 half steps, that's a minor third, so it checks out in the 3/4. And if you remember back to lesson 6, you know that's the formula for a major triad. So this is a C major triad. Now, as it turns out, we can invert the C major triad. So this is root position. We talked about that last time because the root note is in the bass, and bass means the lowest position of the chord. Doesn't mean it has to be in bass clef or treble clef. It just means it's the lowest point. But we could have this version or this version. And those inversions are useful because they give sort of a different sound to the chord. So first inversion, C major chord, or root position, excuse me. First inversion, second inversion. Now let's talk about how you actually perform a chord inversion. I'm going to leave this half. I really like what we did here, but we don't need this half anymore. We'll give that a second to dry. Now, first we're going to learn how to perform inversions, and then we're going to look at how to name them. So, what inversion is this? What inversion is this? And how do you label it? Okay, So we'll go back to our yellow. So I'm going to say root position with an R. Okay, that is root position. We can't get the notes any more close together than that. They are in spacings of thirds, stacks of thirds. Alright, next. We're going to do first inversion. So how do we do first inversion? All we do is we move the notes around. We jumble them around, but we do it in a specific way. First inversion is when you take a root position chord and you take the root note and you put the root note or bass note, which if it's in root position, the root is the bass, and you're going to put that above. So you're going to find the next closest C that's above and put it there. So we got rid of the C, now we have to put it somewhere. This C is too high, we missed this one, so we're going to put it in the closest one. Yeah, it can go up here, but this is the most parsimonious answer. So now this is first inversion. And while I'm going over this, I'm going to erase this just so that it has time to dry while we go through this. So now, the important part is not the exact order, because in real music, it's not always in first inversion where it's E, G, C. Now what's important really is that the root is the bass, equals bass. In first inversion, it's important that the third equals the bass. So this G and this C don't actually have to be right here. This G could be here, the C could be higher, or the G could be here and the C could stay there. The important part is that the E, the third of this root position chord, is now the bass note. And finally, second inversion is we do that process one more time. So we take the bottom note, the bass note of the first inversion chord, and we bring it to the top. So now we have G, C, and we have to relocate that E up here. Alright, so now the important part to remember is that the fifth is the bass. So really, this C could be higher and the E could be there, or the E could be higher and C stay there. Doesn't matter. But what matters is the fifth is the bass. And we know that this is the fifth of this root position chord. So it's always important to reference your root position chord. And we'll label this second. So first inversion, second inversion. And let's say we had a 4-note chord, four unique notes. We could do another rotation, have third inversion, so on and so forth. So each time you take a note and change the bass of it by removing the current bass note and putting it on top or somewhere else, it's an inversion. Alright, so let me draw up another staff. Alright, so what I want you to tell me is, what inversion is this chord in? Now it doesn't look like any of the ones we drew over here. In fact, it doesn't even have the same notes. The only note that is the same as the C, the A, and the F are different. But that doesn't matter. You can figure out what the root position chord is, name that chord, and then figure out what inversion this chord is based on what note in that chord is in the bass. Go ahead and pause the video, try that now, and I'll write up the answer. Okay, so if you're trekking along with me, you were able to reduce this chord down to root position. And you know that that's root position because the notes are as close together as they can possibly get. They are in stacks of thirds, and the thirds go a major third on the bottom, a minor third on top. That is a 4 half-step interval on the bottom, 3 half-step interval on the top, which is in line with the formula for a major triad. And the root is F, so we know it's an F major triad. From that, we can figure out the third of that chord is A, and the fifth of that chord is C. So we know that seeing this chord contains F, A, C. C is in the bass. C is the fifth of the chord, and using our previous stipulation, if the fifth of the chord is in the bass, it is a second inversion triad. Alright, now how do we label this? Well, I just wrote it as second inversion F major. That is true, but that is not conventionally how it's written. When we get into music analysis, composition analysis, there is a method of notating chords, not only their quality, but as well as their root, what they're built off of, so in this case F, as well as their inversion. And that comes back to Roman numerals and figured bass. We are not to Roman numerals yet, we will get there soon, but we are to figured bass. And let's get into what that is. That is sort of the pinnacle of this lesson, and I really hope out of all of the stuff we've covered, figured bass sticks, because it is what we're going to need to do composition analysis in the future. So figured bass, what on earth is figured bass? Well, figured bass is simply a notational convention that tells us how to spell a chord. And it does that by referencing the bass note of that chord, whatever it is. It tells you the spacing of the notes above that chord. So again, let me draw up the staff, as I always do. Actually, let me draw a system. I'll draw a grand staff and we'll use it as an SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, bass sort of system. Remember, systems have their bar lines connected all the way through. That's how you know it's a system and not individual lines of music. And we shall put treble clef here, bass clef here, and just for kicks, we'll label it soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Okay, so let me put up a chord, and let me tell you that the root, I'll do a G major chord. And so you know it's G major, and I just put a G on the board, you know that it is indeed in root position. G major chord has G, B, D in it. Put the G there, we'll put the B here, another G here, and D here. Okay, so this is root position. It's also G major. Now, until we get to Roman numeral analysis, we are going to use X to represent the chord. Capital X, lowercase x, it doesn't matter. That X is going to be changed out for a Roman numeral later on. But what is important to know is that this X represents the entire chord. What it doesn't tell you is the inversion of the chord. How we get the inversion is by measuring the space above and below or excuse me, up from the root. So we actually have to compact this. So we know that there's a G, a B, a G, and a D, right? So we'll keep the bass note G and put that there. We know that immediately above that G is a B. And we know that immediately above that B is a D. Well, actually there's a G there, but seeing it's a repeated note, we can pretend as if it's not there. And then there's another D. All right, so this is root. And what I want you to notice is now we're going to take this X, we're going to rewrite it, X. So that X represents the chord. Now I want you to count the intervals up from the bass. They'll start from the highest note to the lower note. So we're not going to worry about the specific quality, but we are going to worry about the quantity. So we're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the fifth note of this chord is up an interval of 5 from the bass. So it's a fifth, right? Makes sense, it's the fifth of the chord, and that will happen when you're in root position. So we'll put the 5 there. 5. Now, what about the second note of the chord? What's that interval? 1, 2, 3. That's a third. And that's figured bass. Figured bass is simply, the way I write it is a superscript to your chord, whatever this is. So in this case we're using X as a general representation, but it could be a Roman numeral or it could be G. But these numbers represent the interval above the bass of the other notes in the chord. So the second note in the chord is an interval of 3 above, 1, 2, 3. The fifth note of the chord is an interval, or the third note in the chord is an interval of 5 above the bass. Excuse me. Can't find my tongue. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But what if we change this now? So 5, 3 is the notation for a root position chord. So anything, we'll say N now, with a 5, 3 to it, equals root position. But in reality, because root position chords are so common, as a sort of shortcut, we don't put anything for root position chords. We just leave it as the representation, whatever that will be in the future, the Roman numeral. We don't actually put 5, 3, but while we're learning, we're going to say that this is a X chord 5, 3 for the figured bass. And all that means is 5 and 3 for the intervals tells you it's root position. So anytime you see any chord symbol, so a chord name such as C, F, G, whatever it is, or a Roman numeral with a superscript or 5, 3 next to it, is root position. Now, let's move on to a different option. Now we'll keep these notes the same. We'll do B, G, D. But now we'll double, instead we'll put the B in the bass. Okay, so now we're going to reduce this to as small a form as we can without moving the notes around. So we're not going to rotate them above or below each other, we're just going to compact them down. Alright, so now let's try this. So we're going to keep the B here. Next note is a B, we're going to skip it, it's a repeated note, we don't need to worry about it. The next note is a G. Alright, so what's the next closest G above this? We don't want to put it below, right? We're not moving them around, we're just compacting everything. So the next closest G would be here. And the next closest D would be here. Now you already know that this is a inverted form of a G major chord. But this really isn't useful yet because we're not down into a compact form. So we are actually going to reduce this slightly further. So we can't change where the root is, but we can move the upper notes around. So because we didn't get these into compact form, we can do one last little trick, and we're actually going to bring this D down here. Now we have something that looks as compact as it can get without changing what the bass note is. Would you agree? You can't do anything with this G. If you bring it down, then all of a sudden you don't preserve your bass. So once again, we are going to put an X as a general representation of the chord, and now we are going to count the intervals, and we are going to keep them in the same order as they appear. So the top notes interval, the biggest spacing will stay on top, just like it did over here, and then the next closest interval will go below. So you keep it in the same order. So let's count from the bass note up to the highest note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a 6 there. Now, what about the next closest note? 1, 2, 3. 6, 3. Okay? This is first inversion. So we'll change this to a 6 now. Again, like we have shorthand for 5-3 root position, we also have shorthand for first inversion. And because we see first inversion so often, we don't even worry about the 3, we just write the 6. So if you see any chord symbol, whether it be C, G, F, whatever it is, or a Roman numeral with a superscript 6 next to it, you know it's talking about figured bass, and you know it's talking about first inversion. So N to the 6, 3 equals first inversion. All right, now finally, there's one more inversion type. Move back to green. Now let's put D in the bass. So we'll keep these upper notes where they are. We'll do D, we'll do G, we'll do B, and now we'll do D. So we can't change what our bass note is. We already talked about this. The bass note has to stay where it is. It has to stay in the bass. But the closest, what's the closest B we have? Well, the closest B is below it, but that would change the bass. Next closest B is, well, where it is. So we can't do much with that either. But G, what's the next closest G? Well, G, the two closest G's to this D are here and here. If we put it here, we change the bass note. Nope, can't do that. But we can do this one. Alright, so this is the smallest form we can put this chord in without changing the bass. So, once again, we have X, general representation of the chord, and we have how much above the bass is the top note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, it's also a 6. That's weird. This was a 6. But what about this? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, so it is different. So now, as it turns out, there is no shorthand for this. That stays as 6-4. So anything is second inversion. So when you're trying to figure out what the root of a triad is, you have to make it so it's a stack of thirds. But when you're trying to figure out figured bass, too many figures, huh? Well, when you're trying to figure out figured bass anyways, you want it in as compact a form as you can have it, but you can't change what the bass note is. So if D is the bass, you have to keep D in the bass. Nothing can go below that. But the upper notes can be arranged however you like, so such that they are in as compact a form as you can get them. And if you do that with a triad, and even though there's 4 notes here, it's still triad because you have repeated notes, so there's 4 notes that aren't all unique. But if you make a triad, it will always be in root position, first inversion, or second inversion. You just have to reduce it and figure out which it is. And you can do that by leaving the bass low. And the reason being is the bass is a very powerful note. So by changing it, you really change the quality of the chord. And as it turns out, in music, root position and first inversion chords are used pretty interchangeably. There is a difference, but they are used pretty much one right after the other. They're interchangeable for the most part. But second inversion chords, 6/4 chords, only come in certain parts of music. They're usually a part of a cadential pattern. Again, something we'll get into pretty far down the road from now. But know that second inversion chords serve a very specific function, and they're a lot less common than first and root position chords. These are used throughout entire compositions and aren't really a specific function. They're just thrown in whatever inversion is convenient. So that is where we're going to end lesson 7. I hope to see you for lesson 8. I must now depart.